Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Great Tech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Jonathan Orpin. He's a lifelong entrepreneur and sustainability advocate, founder of New Energy Works and Pioneer Millworks, two eco-friendly leaders in design, build, and manufacturing. With over 30 years of experience operating on the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profits, he has built businesses that prioritize sustainability and social responsibility. In 2022, Jonathan transitioned both companies to an employee stock ownership plan, ensuring their mission continues for generations under employee ownership. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with how you got into this industry to begin with.
Wow, so that was forever ago. And I had no idea I was going to be a carpenter or a builder at the time. So things just happened. Guy came up to me and said I needed some help on a job site. Could I help? And I kind of fell in love with building things. That was in the 80s, before
Nice.
most of you and maybe even you were born. So
I'm an 80s baby, so I'm squeaking in there. Yeah.
Yeah. We were making a living, but barely. But it was pretty clear to me that I really love to make things and build things. And then at the same time, it was also just the aftermath of the OPEC's first oil embargo. And people were finally really looking at the environment as a real concern and a real issue. And it just, both of those things, building things and environmental causes, just spoke to me so loud I couldn't.
Yeah. That's cool that you paired that so early on of the construction industry and sustainability thing. What do you think about those two things kind of clicked in to be like, no, this makes sense to pair together even back in the 80s?
Well, I was in the middle of working with some folks to develop a local volunteer recycling center in a upstate town, in an upstate New York town. And everyone I talked to was talking about the environment. And we ended up creating the first ever recycling center in this town. That's when cars would come in and you'd empty the cans and bottles out of the back of their pickup truck or whatever, and you'd sort them in colors. And it was a lot of fun. And it was a community event every Saturday. And it just eventually evolved into friendships with people who knew how to build and this continued conversation about the environment. So I can't imagine separating them, honestly. If you think about it, the built environment, as most of your people know, represent a significant part of our energy usage and our energy needs in the whole country and maybe the world. And so you just can't run from it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So what does it mean to be a responsible business in your mind in the face of all the different challenges that we have here in construction?
So some things are harder and some things are easier. It's kind of interesting. You mentioned the triple bottom line. I bet you some of your folks know what that means, but maybe others don't. So it really refers to that balance of looking at business while sitting on a three-legged stool. And all three legs of that stool we try to make them equally important. They are looking at the filters of people, of planet, and of profit. So our idea here is that our job in business is to think about people, our own people who work with us, our clients, suppliers, our partners, but also more than that, our community. Maybe, for instance, in your case or somebody's case, their church or their school, their town, but it's bigger than that too. It's the city, the state, the country, the world. It's people. And then the second, and if we look at people as an important part of the reason to be in business, then that kind of blends carefully and naturally into the second two stages, which is planet. It's the only one I know of. And gosh, we could talk about that for more than one of these podcasts, couldn't we? And then the next one is profit, and profit's critical. Unfortunately, most businesses think that's the only one. When people say, "Oh, the bottom line, what's your bottom line?" They're really only talking about profit, and in that way, they're often only talking about how to make profit or enrich those in the ownership class of that business, as opposed to what profit could be used for, which is to improve the lives of all the people in the business and allow you to make good decisions regarding people and planet. So the three work together so closely in my mind and always have. It was really in the 90s when the term triple bottom line was coined. I think somewhere around 94. And I don't remember the guy's name, an economist, Paul something, but smart guy. And he coined this phrase. And I remember a few years back asking a mentor of mine, a guy named John Abrams, who has written an amazing book that your people might be interested in called The Company We Keep. And in addition, he's just come out with a new book called Founder to Future, which talks about transitioning businesses from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. Really good stuff. And you may want to have him on your show, by the way, Todd. But I asked him, I said, hey, John, when do I know if I'm a triple bottom line company? He laughed at me and said, Jonathan, you've been a triple bottom line company since the day you opened. And that made me feel awfully good because we have been, the three work together. I mentioned that some things are harder about being a sort of environmentally sound or sustainable business, if we want to call it that way, because we have to make decisions that sometimes are either more expensive or materials harder to get, or we have to learn more about it, for instance. But some things are easier. And that's so interesting about business. If you're a mission-driven company, if you're one that you can get people to believe in, then you're going to get better people to work with. And they're going to be more focused and committed. Coworkers are some of the best people I know. And so as opposed to just, showing up and leaving, I mean, yes, we all have private lives and we want that work-life balance. So millennial of me to talk that way, but it's true. And that's valid stuff to discuss. But during that time you're working together, there is a commitment that tends to be a little bit strong.
Yeah. For sure. Maybe this is the millennial coming out in me, but I fully agree with having a strong mission that people are bought into, that is clearly communicated for the whole team. It makes it a whole lot easier because you guys are all rowing in the same direction, kind of linking arm in arm together, fighting for this, whatever the ultimate goal is for that particular company. It makes it easier to be able to identify when we're here, we are on mission. We're going to go after it. We're going to go after it hard, and let's link arms in camaraderie in this fight too.
Every study shows that the wages you pay is super important to your people. But truly, the number one thing, at least these studies show, is that people want to work where they want to work. And that's a big part of it. I had a young man stop in yesterday. He works for a metal shop up the road from one of our shops. And he was looking around. He said, well, there's this guy who works here now who's been telling me how great it is to work here. And I want to know why. And is this a place that I should come? I said, well, honestly, I don't do poaching, but you're here and I'm happy to share with you. And if it seems like it's a good fit, we can talk further. But I was talking to him about our approach to intercompany communication and what we see as a vision and the reason why we're in business. He was asking really good questions too. And he looked at me and said, yeah, at our place, we have no idea what the vision of the company is. Nobody tells us anything from management. In fact, they barely talk to us. We just show up and punch in and then punch out at the end of the day and do whatever anybody says. But there's no real sense of community there. And he kind of looked wistfully and I know that he likes his job, but he got him thinking about how you could be in a place that's a little bit more community based and maybe, as I said before, mission driven.
Yeah, for sure. So let's look at that kind of triple bottom line from a couple of different vantage points here. So starting, how should construction leaders really think about reducing the carbon footprint? So we're tackling the planet side while also staying competitive. So the balance between what's good for the environment and what's good for the purely profit-driven bottom line.
So, Todd, there's no miracles here. If there are no miracles, you have to work a little harder, I think. You got to know a little bit more. One of the things I tell my clients in the part of the business where we're designing or building homes, for instance, is I warn them right up front. I say, we're going to try to inspire you perhaps to build a little bit smaller so that you can build a little better, put more into the shell or more into quality materials or more into craft, things that will last forever, longer than that fourth bedroom that nobody will ever use or the dining room that's there on Thanksgiving. People often will respond to that well. So I guess part of the answer to your question is to be thoughtful about what they want to buy and so that they can spend their money better. I mean, that's one example. Just as people want to work for places that they want to work at, clients want to buy from places that they want to buy at. It's not just money. I mean, for sure, there's a lot of that, but It's people want to buy at a place that will inspire them and make them feel good when they're, living in a well-crafted house, or a house that is super quiet because it's well insulated or isn't using many resources or much of their utility bill because it's well insulated, for instance. A lot of that's education, some of it's inspiration.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there,
I'll just say one more thing, Todd.
yeah,
Sorry. Getting the message out, it's all about. For almost from the beginning, we've always had our marketing and communication team as an in-house staff. And that's not easy for everybody. That's not even possible for some. But the ability to tell your story, to share that narrative, and to some extent to control that narrative, is part of that answer to your earlier question.
and that's exactly where I was going with it, is the storytelling aspect of it. You really have to paint a vision for people of, and connect that to the reality of it. If you're just spinning a story and it's not connected to reality, it's not going to land and hold true as actually practical and authentic. When you have a good story to tell there, and you're able to paint that vision that connects with where they're wanting to go, that's where the magic really happens, and people are going to be much more receptive to, like, oh yeah, you're right about that. I will only use that dining room, on Thanksgiving, what have you. And that's when, the dots start getting connected for people.
And it helps if you've got good design, that's for sure. And so, there are a lot of great designers in the world. We're talking about the construction end of this, the bespoke home sort of part of it, but it's true in anything that you create, that helps to tell a narrative of thoughtfulness. And some things aren't as sexy. There might be an electrician going out there. Well, there's nothing sexy about Romex. How am I going to tell that story? There's always a story to tell. It might be a story about your approach to your community, or your care for your coworkers, or that sort of thing. And if you have no story, well, gosh, maybe you should have a story. Figure that out, because life's better with a story.
Yeah. Why do you think the construction industry doesn't tell that story as much as what they should?
I think a lot of them don't really have a good story to tell,
or have taken the time to really think about the story.
And, I'll just say there's a certain amount of greed and laziness in the world, not just construction. I mean, every time there's a reasonable suggestion for an environmental advance, the Home Builders Association of America jumps up in its arms and holding its throats like somebody's choking them to death, and they're going to die any minute if this particular advance goes through. I mean, that gets so annoying, frankly. I'm sorry for all you HBA members out there, but that's just the truth. You need to embrace the future, not fight it every turn.
Yeah. So on that front, are there a couple aspects to this question? Okay, what are some of the most promising materials for sustainable construction, and what are some of the myths that are out there that should be knocked down?
The material I'm most excited about these days is wood fiber insulation. Honestly, we're living in a time when pulp industry has been decimated because we're not using as much paper anymore, and there are environmental concerns with the massification of pulp into paper products, and there's some environmental issues. Boy, the pulp mills have gone under left and right. That leaves an interesting hole, so to speak, in the forest industry, because one of the good things about pulp manufacturers is they're using a low quality tree. And by taking low quality trees out of the forest, we are, if we do it well and thoughtfully, we're better managing the forest. Forest needs management. Don't get me wrong. I'm a tree hugger. I'm an environmentalist, and I'm the first guy to say that our forest management systems right now are lacking. Too much of us versus them, not enough getting in there and cleaning out the forest as they should be. But if we could take low quality material out of the forest to allow trees to grow to a stronger, better material, whether it's because you want them to be collecting carbon or you want them to build a better timber frame, it's either way, let them do their thing. But most importantly, it'll also cut down on the fire hazards we're seeing all the time. These fire hazards occur a lot of times because of the buildup in fuel. And that fuel is a buildup because of a lot of reasons, but one of them is poor forest management, and it's pretty frustrating to see. This is a big topic, so I'll just skim over it pretty carefully. But the use of these lower quality, either wood processing leftovers or low quality trees, et cetera, to be chewed up and turned into wood-based Wood fiber insulation is amazing. I'll just list one big plant that has finally opened in Maine. It's called Timber HP. Everybody should look that up right now. Timber HP. They have brought wood fiber insulation, which has been active in Europe for 30 years, to the US. And they're doing an amazing job. All of our homes are insulated with wood fiber, either loose fill or bats right now. And then this plant that I mentioned, Timber HP in Madison, Maine, is trying to get enough funds to put a third line up, which is making rigid wood fiber board. Sort of like polyisocyanurate high R board, but except it's made from wood fiber. And it's very, very common in Europe, but they don't have that third line up yet. They're running a little shy on cash to do that. But I can tell you personally that the wood fiber insulation and the bats are amazing. They're easy to use and pretty cost effective, frankly, and they're made from low quality trees. It's just amazing. Plus a small amount of borate in there as a fire suppressant and an anti-vermin ingredient. 6% borates, which even for cellulose insulation, which has 16% or so borates in there, is another huge advantage. It's amazing. Timber HB out of Madison, Wisconsin. I'm so psyched. We also, as a company, import quite a bit of rigid wood fiber insulation from Europe. We use a product called Steico, Steico, and we use that as the exterior of our envelopes as a thermal break, similar to what some people are using, like I say, the high R sheathing boards or expanded polystyrene or one of those.
Yeah. Interesting.
Sorry, I don't know if you want me to get geeking out here on wood science.
I love it.
And building science. But from an environmental standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint for the building industry, wood fiber insulation has been pretty cool. Wood in general as a building material, most of your clients know, or most of your listeners know, it rocks. There's just no bad to build with wood. It's the lowest carbon equivalent style of building material there is. It is just far superior to any other material when it comes to environmental building. Even bad cutting down of trees is better than building with concrete and steel. They have their place, don't get me wrong, but wood rocks.
Yeah. I like it. I like the passion. What do you think most people get wrong about a sustainable construction industry?
That it doesn't mean anything. It does. That their clients don't really want it. They do. That it's a lot harder. That's partly true. It is a little harder. You got to be smart. You got to be caring. You can't just throw up the wall. And I was just talking to some clients today, and we were talking about airtight envelopes. And they said, well, how tight are yours? I said, we're plenty tight. We don't go to the point where, there's no air change at all, but it's really, really tight, because otherwise, why bother with insulation at all? It's like, I can remember my mother always yelling at me, close the front door when you leave. Well, if you don't have a reasonably tight envelope, you may as well leave the front door open. So it is true that, you really want to be thoughtful about the envelope building. So that's probably some of the things that folks are getting wrong, if I can say so.
Yeah, interesting. So let's shift into the people side for the next few minutes here. Okay. So how do you ensure that your company's mission and vision are built not just for the short term, quarter over quarter, but really for the long term, and you're building a lasting company culture?
Well, there's no guarantees. Small business is a pain in the butt. Let's face it. It's a lot of hard work. Probably big businesses too, but I don't know that. I have a small business, and so what was clear to me is that as an owner or a founder, there's about 3, maybe 4 ways to leave a company. The first one is you leave it in a box because you've died on the site and you leave a mess behind you. The second is you sell it to perhaps a VE firm of some sort of venture capitalist or a private equity firm. And that has a history of, bruised and dead bodies that it leaves behind it, because they come in with a heavy debt load and yet all they want to do is get a return. And that's very difficult for many of the small businesses to survive. Also, frankly, the margins that you see in construction just aren't big enough to attract many really good quality private equity concerns. Or you might sell it to, you'll sell it on the open market. That's always a little tricky. The third might be to sell it to your family. Not everybody has that. And generational transitions aren't always successful anyway. The fourth, though, the one that I picked was to use an amazing US only bipartisan supported program called an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. It was developed in the late 70s amongst the ERISA laws. Those are the laws that were developed to protect people's Ks and the rest from greedy owners or whatever. And so in there's this small little paragraph, this ESOP paragraph that allows us to sell, us being maybe people who were the founders and the owners, to sell to the people who helped you build it, your employees, your coworkers, without having to put their mortgage or their money on the line. It's done with a tax-protected maneuver called an ESOT, an Employee Stock Ownership Trust. It's a tax-protected process. It's highly regulated because as soon as you use the word tax-protected, you attract a certain amount of fraud and greed, but it is highly regulated by the Department of Labor. Hopefully we'll still have a Department of Labor, and the IRS. Hopefully we'll still have that as well, depending on what happens in Washington. But because of those, that regulation and that protection, it allows these people, all my coworkers, and I've got about 150 myself, to start a secondary, other than the 401k, a secondary retirement plan, because they are actually owning shares in the company, which those shares are valued by a third-party evaluation company every year so that they know the value of their shares when they retire or leave the company. And at that time, they turn in the shares, they get the money for doing that, and it's just a secondary retirement plan. Mm-hmm. We all know 65% of the people in America are retiring without a proper retirement savings account. This is just one more wonderful way to do it. And as an aside, theoretically, and I think it's true, it's not for me to say, you'd have to ask my coworkers, but it does imply that people are on board with continuing to make this company work in the future. Because I'm soon going to be retired. And so I do honestly want it to continue. I want these people, my longest coworkers, 37 years with me. I've got really, really important people in the company that have been with me 31 and 26 and 32 years. And my second gen management is 18 years and 13 years.
That's awesome.
And 20 years. And so, that's really good stuff. But they've helped build this company. Why shouldn't they also be part of that company? So for me, it was just so smart. It's an ESOP. Everybody should look into it as long as you're a certain size. Maybe, I don't know what that is, $10, $20 million a year or more, because it is a kind of a pricey process. Smaller than that, you may want to think about, everything from worker-owned co-op to selling to certain key members or something like that, if we're talking about transitions, which again is probably a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Interesting. What advice would you give leaders who want to build a business that, is built to thrive long after they leave the business?
There's a great book called Leaders Eat Last. It's based on the Marine officer training program. I think people should.
It's right next to me right now, actually.
Oh, how cool is that?
It's a good book.
It's really good. And what it basically talks about is how the Marine officers, eat last. Be a servant leader. There's nothing more than that. Everybody who knows me, it doesn't mean that, by the way, I kowtow to anyone in the company. I'm a strong leader, and I think that's a requirement of many an entrepreneur at all. But I don't take too much. I take a fair share. I've never used that company as my piggy bank, and people need to know that. You need to communicate that. This company exists for more than just to, completely line my pockets. And if people understand that and they have a vision, then I think that's a great way to build a business. You do have to communicate that. So we have, for instance, a postcard of the day that goes out every day, believe it or not. And we have a monthly paycheck newsletter called In the News. and we have what we call a day of business, where we shut down for the day. We talk about the finances. We're pretty much an open book company. We talk about how we did last year, how we've done over a rolling 10-year period, how we hope to do this upcoming year, things we've done right, things we've done wrong, investments we've made. We also share a lot about the projects we've been doing, because not everybody in the company knows what other people in the company really are doing. So we have a lot of sharing. And at the end of the day, we drink beer and throw axes at targets.
There you go. I like it. Yeah, I mean, I think that goes a long way in helping creating that buy-in that we start the conversation with, of getting people, bought into the mission of the company, and everybody going in the same way. And I like the fun aspect of it that you included there at the end, because if people are able to enjoy their coworkers and see them not as, just the Bob from accounting, but actually like Bob the person, and know their likes and their interests and see them as a real person, then they're much more likely to get on board and, give them the benefit of the doubt and lock arms with them in the actual day-to-day job task. So as we start to kind of land the plane here, a couple rapid fire questions for you. What does the phrase modeling the future, what does that kind of mean and bring up in your mind?
Be the company you would like to hire.
I like it. What does innovation mean to you?
So I think that's sort of a cliche word that is truly valuable. I think there's a lot to learn from the past, but some of those things aren't really great. So for instance, wood fiber insulation, that is an example of innovation that comes to my mind.
Yeah, for sure. How do people find out more information and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan, Jonathan, there's different ways to spell it, at newenergyworks.com. But we're also newenergyworks.com and pioneermillworks.com. And pretty cool websites, though, as anybody knows, websites are hard to keep perfectly up to date, but ours is pretty up to date. And we like to tell our story. So we're happy to share that. So those are two good ways to do that. I answer any questions anybody ever has on an email. So
awesome. Well, Jonathan, last question for you. If I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
Wow. Just one thing?
Just one.
I would push for additional wood and wood-based products that we see, for instance, in the mass timber market, onto more of the commercial world. If I see another concrete tilt-up building in my life, if I never see one in my life, it will be too soon. There's just way too much embodied energy going into those buildings when there are other ways to do it.
Yeah. Nice. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
Todd, thanks. Good questions. I appreciate your time.